We are going to be doing a consistent Thursday of every month, and it's going to be a wine and cheese Thursday. So every time you come, you're going to get a chance to drink some wine, some delicious food, and the best part of it all is the networking. So we want to do a little bit of an overview of how we're kind of rebranding the ABC and its role in supporting the ecosystem for Alberta. So with the Alberta Blockchain Consortium, we are a consortium of numerous companies coming together because we want to be able to create clarity in what's happening in the space. There are so many different meetup groups, there's so many different fractions. What ABC wants to do is be able to be that voice, that market. We're here to be able to build the value for all the other companies that are sitting here in the ecosystem that want to be able to get out to network, to bring awareness to their business, such as what NDAX is doing in the space, what Guild One is doing in the space, what Build Bitcoin is doing in the space. So many other companies are here supporting our ecosystem, and we want to be able to support them by being able to reach a larger audience. Right now, the ABC, we're actually the largest meetup group across Alberta right now. We have 1,300 members from being able to start consolidating more of these groups. And we're branching into Edmonton now as well. So we'll be doing once a month here and once a month there to really keep encouraging and growing the ecosystem. We are lucky, we have a really incredible team that's working with us right now. So Rosanna, we have a director of marketing. What Rosanna's going to be able to do for everybody here is if you have an event that's going to be happening in the space, if you have good news that you want to share, a press release, a tweet you want retweeted, send them over to our director of marketing, because her job is to make sure that our market, everyone that's aware of the ABC, gets aware of what you're doing as well. So let us help market for what you're doing. We're going to be able to have, we have a director of finance now, we have a director of business development, we even now have a director of energy. So we're going to be working very closely with what Guild One's doing and partnering with the YY Chains Industrial Committee so that we can help their efforts in what they're doing for the energy sector in blockchain. So it's a little bit about who we are and what we do. We really want to be here to help grow the ecosystem, market the ecosystem, work with everybody, and really help to raise the awareness for what's happening in Alberta, because right now blockchain is really kind of seen as its own industry often by itself, but it really is an enabling tool that works with machine learning, that works with the energy sector, that works with robotics, that works with IoT. So we need to be able to raise that awareness and start bringing that message to start letting people know that Alberta has something to offer on the world stage in terms of technology. Right now we're very well known for oil, we're very well known for agriculture, but we're not really well known for technology, specifically blockchain technology. So what the ABC wants to do is not just raise that awareness to Albertans, but across Canada, that we have value, that people can start bringing their investments back here, that we can start bringing in more people of excellence to help grow this blockchain ecosystem. So thank you so much for attending the first one. I hope you guys keep coming back every Thursday. And this discussion is with James Graham and Dave Bradley on why blockchain.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kalea. Yeah, I got a better mic.
You do.
Quarter win, swung nothing.
Well, thanks everyone for coming. What we wanted to do today, we want to go after the question of why blockchain. You know, it's a pretty broad question that a lot of businesses have sort of struggled to find the answer to. You know, there's a lot of people trying things, and a lot of businesses that I've seen anyway haven't really been 100% clear on what they might want to do and why. So what we're going to do today is kind of a recreation of the first conversation that James and I ever had. This is about 2 years ago. There was a conference at UFC, a blockchain conference, and James was speaking about their early efforts in the space with the blockchain, smart contracts, and whatnot. And I was the asshole in the crowd, being like, "Okay."
I was going to say that. He's already
There
Okay. So yeah, I was the asshole in the crowd. As opposed to the asshole with microphone.
We have consensus.
And the idea behind that conversation was basically just, why are you doing that with the blockchain? And James's answers I found very useful in that conversation to shape some of my own views about how useful private chains can be, where those kind of technologies might fit in, and where that's going to go. 2 years later, we hopefully know a lot more than we did back then, and we can add some context and and take the discussion a little bit further. So, start us out, I guess, best way to go would be if you could just describe, I think a lot of people in the room are familiar with Guild 1, but if you give like a 2-minute overview of what Guild 1 does specifically with, smart contracts, blockchain, DLT technology.
Sure. So we have for years been involved in contract disputes between counterparties on oil and gas contracts. And for years we were trying to bend this model because these contracts break for the most ridiculous of reasons. They're mostly administrative. It's not really fraud, it's not really malfeasance, it's just bad admin. And the bad admin really starts to turn into materiality when you have $1 million, $1 billion assets in the field that are producing tens of millions of dollars of value in a database somewhere that affects a calculation that's running on a deduction stream really has downstream impact. And the amount of people involved in that in Calgary and in the oil industry, generally it would be really surprising to anybody who's not in the industry, and to anybody who's in the industry, we see this every day. What Guild 1 did to that point was we would use data mining, data algorithms, and we would mine truth out of their databases, but we would still go into the contract counterparties and hit dispute, because all that master data management cleanup in your own department, in your own company, starts to lose value when you have to trade with a partner. So what we do on Ledger is really, you could consider it as sharing and comparing data, getting the contract counterparties to agree on the base set of facts, and using the security, privacy, and trust of blockchain and DLT and smart contracts to actually allow them to share their data and to share their representations of the contracts and their representations of the assets with their counterparties. So it's really about shared facts, and it's about sharing your facts in a very secure, private, and trustworthy way.
All right, so I guess back it up a couple steps to take the sort of 10,000-foot view. It would be fair to say that you guys have a bunch of data from a bunch of different counterparties, and you put all of that data into some business logic. You execute the logic and you get the result of the contract, right? So is there a reason that can't be done in a database?
Well, I think it's done in databases today. Here's the first problem, is that everybody's keeping their own copy of all of that data. And this is all happening in relational databases. And we have all of our data referenced, we have all of our contract representations, we have all of our accounting systems, all of our general ledgers, all of our measurement systems, but we have all of our own. We don't share any of that stuff. And really what we're talking about here is breaking that into multiple pieces so everyone's sharing the exact same system. You cannot transact on our system unless you're running the exact same code as your counterparty. So this gets rid of calculations. So can you do that in a database? Yes. One of the reasons why we're moving faster than we had originally thought in terms of contracts going on ledgers is because that we're looking for new models around profitability. The existing centralized database system still creates dispute because you have a problem about who's injecting the data. And all the centralized systems in town are operator-centric, not entitled party-centric. So yes, you can do this in a decentralized database context, but what blockchain has done is actually two things. One, the mystery of it got a lot of people interested. Because if we just went out 2 years ago and were saying, hey, we got this new way to share facts on your royalty contracts, we'll just keep it to our primary use case. Who cares? But when you put blockchain in 2 years ago, all of a sudden they were listening. So that's sort of a reductio. That's not a reason why blockchain from a technical sense, but it sure was to get cover. There isn't an executive committee or boardroom in town who's not talking about what blockchain may mean to their business. That's not true of decentralized databases, even though blockchain is really a decentralized database.
All right, I think that was mostly the answer that I eventually accepted 2 years ago when I was heckling. You know, it might be technically not the best solution every time, but sometimes, you know, if you build something that's better than what we have now, and you actually get people to use it, then it doesn't necessarily matter if it was the best technical solution to get there, right? So
there were technologies available 2 years ago to do this stuff faster. But were there technologies available to do it with more trust? If I don't trust my contract counterparty, how is centralizing my data with them help? What blockchain gives us is the ability to do that data cleanup across the contract divide. Do the share and compare in a measured, manageable, immutable, auditable way. There is no third-party audit on our systems. It's a running audit. If you're interested in what happened in a blockchain transaction, you look at the ledger. If you're interested in what happened in a decentralized database where we're keeping our own facts, you have to audit both parties, right? We're sharing all of those systems now. That's what brings down the G&A cost, is because we don't need to have as many admins or loathe the admin problem because they're basically defending values they don't necessarily believe in. When a dispute happens in oil and gas and counterparty one says to counterparty two, we don't think you're paying us. Both organizations scramble into a defensive mode around data they don't necessarily believe in that's in their systems, that's being used to run their business, but they don't necessarily trust it. All of a sudden, if you're comparing with your counterparties and ascribing that to a ledger that's immutable and transparent and nobody can change those values without contract counterparties agreeing, you replace all of that dispute in G&A.
Okay, so I don't know if you mentioned this, but all of your tech is on Corda, right?
Well, not all our tech.
Well,
the
DLT
component.
component.
The ledger is Corda.
Is Corda.
Mike likes Corda.
Why Corda? Why not Hyperledger, like Mike likes?
You know, the Hyperledger builds are interesting. Well, Corda, throw some props to a programming language and a platform called Java, invented by a Calgarian. And anybody who hears me speak knows I talk about this because as a community, we need to reference that we have had lots of innovation here. We complain about building pipelines, and we're really challenged with building pipelines, but we've always been really good at the talent pipeline to the States. We've always been super good at that. There's been no problems with that pipeline, right? And so we need to reflect. So that was one reason we adopted the Java programming language. Guild 1 was actually the first commercial Java programming shop in Calgary way back in the day. I'm very old. I know I look young and svelte, but I'm quite old. And I think the interesting thing there was both Hyperledger and Corda came out as Java builds. So first the Java heads go, hey, Java builds, that's awesome. We can write in high-level languages like Kotlin or Scala. We can execute in a JVM. That eliminated everything but Hyperledger and Corda. So then you're choosing between Hyperledger and Corda. Hyperledger, in the first 3 months of existence, forked into 6 builds, which forked into 11 builds. And then Hyperledger Fabric sort of kind of emerged as a standard. But by that point in time, we had already experimented running contracts. Hyperledger would release a new version, and it would break all of our shit. So how often can you do that as a software shop? And then there was Corda. And Corda, from the very first release, I think ours was 0.04 or 0.4, we transacted on 0.6. And I had so much faith in the Corda builds by that time because it was being run by very intelligent people with very good software methodology who had a very single-minded focus of servicing banks, because Corda is owned by 47 banks and is 110 banks in their consortium. We downloaded, so we did the first blockchain transaction in the royalty space in like last year, and we downloaded the Corda build the night before. We had so much comfort with them by that point in time because we downloaded every build. We had no contact with them at this point. Just downloaded their open sources build and it ran. So this was so dramatically different than our experiments with Ethereum, which still doesn't work, right? Like, let's be clear. Our experiences with Hyperledger, which was a bunch of different builds, and IBM Sync and Resources, they will be at the table. Don't get me wrong. You know, they say you'll never get fired by dealing with Big Blue and IBM. And I was an IBM partner for 6 years. It can't touch Corda from a throughput perspective, from an architectural perspective, from a build over build, from an software entrepreneur's perspective. I can't have that kind of technical uncertainty in my base platform. So Corda just kept solving the problems.
Okay, so you touched on a little bit of my next question. Did you look at, seriously, things like Ethereum, EOS, public chains as an option?
Not too much, because here's the issue, right? So full disclosure, I mean, I'm involved with the mining community to a bit. I've made a lot of money off crypto last year. And the interesting thing was that all of the technology over there I've never really believed in. Because why the hell in the private counterparty? So I've worked for Prairie Sky since that company came into existence. I've worked with Crescent Point since they were like 7 people. Watch these companies form and grow and build. And you realize the primacy of the contract vehicles, right? Any business is about your contracts, your commercial agreements with your counterparties, your suppliers, your customers. Why the hell would we create a model on which we're sharing that data about our contracts with anybody but our counterparties? Why would we need to have a network built that does a consensus algorithm based on statistical numbers of gaming large parts of the network? Why would we build a model where consensus means 2 parties agree on something, right? So in my world, node-to-node consensus, that means company X and company Y agree. I don't need to mine anything in that context. I just to make sure these companies agree. So we never really looked. We played with Solidity, we played with Ethereum early, and the first transaction we put through on Ethereum took 3 days. And the gas fees were more than the amount of the royalty calculation that we put over it. So I can't go down to Phillips, CEO at Prairie Sky, and say, hey, this blockchain shit's really cool. I don't know when the transactions will happen, and I don't know how much they'll cost. But other than that, it's like awesome, right? You're not gonna get anywhere. And the other vector inside of that is if I go to a CEO and I say, you know, your data, it's encrypted, but it's everywhere. Every node on the network has a copy of your data. Also a model that doesn't run. Why would company Y have company A and B's data? Regardless of whether they can see it or read it and it's encrypted, why am I computing it? Why am I processing it? Why is it moving over my network? When throughput and network bandwidth are issues, why am I jamming all these transactions into everyone's nodes? So to me, public chains never really made any sense outside of large mining operations and Bitcoin itself. Bitcoin's the only one that really makes sense to me.
Bitcoin makes sense to me too. So now that we've decided on Corda,
Have we all decided on Corda?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
people in New York are very happy.
I think one of my criticisms 2 years ago was that if we were going to do this with a database, that it'd be a lot more efficient. And so how is Corda comparing to a modern database right now in terms of like throughput, efficiency?
So Corda last pressure testing was 1.2 million transactions per second, and then the benchmark stopped because they had beat the benchmark. Now there's a whole bunch of factors that go into that. It's really hard to compare transactions per second across multiple transaction systems because it comes into what data is in your transaction model, how fast are you transacting. But the reality is 2 years ago, we would see lags. You would see a node and we would model, so we could see the 6 nodes running, and we would see lags in an update running across node. So you'd see node A light up, or you'd see the consensus of the contract come across. You would see a visible lag, and then node B would light up. Here's the terms of the contract you agree. They approve to the contract, another visible lag until now you don't see those lags. We tested against, well, we're AWS, but we also have to test other projects because our customers need to decide whatever they want to run on. Another beauty of the Java program is we can run anywhere, Java platform. So from a throughput perspective, 2 years ago was a nightmare, honestly. You were looking at like, how can I tell these executives that this is going to be a scalable, reliable, and secure platform if you're seeing visible lags? And you can only blame the network and the hardware for so long before, because other things are transacted. Now you've seen the A class go out there. We're starting to see that not quite Visa level of transaction, because that's in the transaction world. Visa's ability to execute transactions is viewed as this really, unicorn type thing. They can process so many transactions per second. But now you're starting to see those benchmarks emerge. And that's not an apples to apples comparison. Remember that when we're actually transacting in a blockchain state, we're doing encryption, we're doing more compute, we're doing far more compute than anybody else does on their transaction. So now you're starting to see 1.2 million TPS off Corda. There's not very many things that we can't model with that kind of throughput.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've heard, as an argument for using public chains a lot, both EOS and Ethereum, I've seen this argument put out there, is that spinning something up, a smart contract on one of these public chains is actually easier than running the same thing, the same business logic on a database. Do you think that's true, and is that true for Corda?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there because I'm not aware of all of the tools of all the platforms. I don't know if anybody's aware of all of them, but I defy then, if you're arguing that it's easier to put a smart contract and business logic into EOS or IOTA or Ethereum, or I would argue that for what type of person? Because for a database admin, you know the kind of tools that we have in the Oracle world, right? Drag and drop interfaces, schema bindings. You can put Oracle instances at other databases and derive schemas. None of those tools exist on any blockchain platform that I've seen, right? So I think that's a really gamed kind of answer if they're saying it's easier to put business logic into, I don't know, EOS than Oracle. It's a completely different structure and mindset, but there's no tools that mirror what's going on in the enterprise space with those big database builds. There are plenty of workflow, business logic tools that have amazing interfaces on them. The question is about adoption and cross usage, like how much are these things being used. But in terms of tools, we're still in our infancy in terms of the supportive tools that a blockchain developer or blockchain development shop or IT shop inside of an enterprise that's adopting blockchain need. They're nowhere near what the relational data tools are. Look at just Microsoft's whole stack, look at Oracle's whole stack. Until you could argue that a particular blockchain platform had a stack like that, that's kind of a gamed answer.
Yeah, so you guys have had some success, Guild One, with some really good pilot projects. You know, you've got a lot of industry buy-in, a lot of stakeholders at the table. Is anyone actually using like full-on blockchain tech that is replacing their legacy systems? Yes.
There's two things you really got to think about in a highly regulated environment like we work in. And regulations can be your friend, not always. One is, first time we went around the circle, almost nobody knew what we were talking about. We were able to do just about anything, right? Because they were like, what? How do you spell blockchain? Hey, there's an AI in there. You know, take all these weird kind of, okay, cool. And the first time we went around the circle, IT was like, yeah, whatever, we're busy. And compliance was nowhere near. And the business was left to lead the business with this interesting project that had executive cover. And we got some stuff done in that range, thank God. But then we started putting smart contracts into like more and more assets. It was easy when it was one well, it was easy when it was 5 wells, but as we added wells, the other parts of the departments start firing up, and 2 come to the table, IT and compliance. So then we had to stand up. So I had 14 nodes interacting on my first environment and starting to move contract information around them, starting to do accruals, not settling all those transactions yet, because that's a whole other world of compliance that we'll talk about. But just doing the accruals and calculating and running against the legacy system to say, hey, who's in the right? And in some of those conditions, particularly at the royalty shops, our software was being compared to our software. So it was really embarrassing when we didn't match, right? Because we had our legacy product doing all of Prairie Sky's royalty accruals, and then we had the ledger, which was doing consensualized accruals with their counterparties. First couple of times it didn't match, right? Because you're running entirely different sequences of data and you're ingesting some of the same data, but you're actually consensualizing terms, which moves you slightly from other sides of the contract's view of the world. So once that started to happen, then the executives are starting to say, wait a minute, I need some cover here. Like, I'm a public company. I can't just roll a new system in. And so then you got to weigh adoption. Because to me, and this is probably going to be surprising to some people because I've been such an advocate for this technology, to me it's not adoption until legacy is turned off, right? If you have a running system and the legacy system is still running in the background, that's not actually adoption, right? Until that legacy system that's doing compute on those assets is turned off, you haven't adopted anything because they can roll back to their previous state like that. So that's not a really interesting thing that a lot of people in our blockchain revolution like to, they're like, James, you're going too hard, man. You need to like consider that a pilot once adopted is like, well, no, it's not in production. So why this is relevant is we had to take those nodes then and run a compliance environment. This was an environment that had more plug into it, more API, so that you could tie in compliance systems and they could read data from the ledger and actually compare it internally, or have their auditor, both Manulife. So my first transactors were Manulife and Prairie Sky. Manulife's oil company, NAL, and Prairie Sky. So the compliance was crazy, man. Like Manulife's compliance was like this. The cost of compliance and the cost of Deloitte's review was about 40 times bigger than the cost of actually developing the software to do the transaction, right? Like it was just crazy, but we thought, well, once we're through this with Manulife, or once we're through this with Deloitte review of the code, it gets easier. No, it doesn't. It actually gets harder, because as soon as you trigger that, here comes the IFRS compliance, here comes the GAAP compliance, and guess what? We don't contravene any of those regulations. We're in compliance with all of them. In fact, we're a superior way to comply with most of them, because the digits are surfaceable. All surfaceable and shared. But the compliance people don't know that. And they're still back to year 2 when they're trying to figure out how to spell blockchain, right? So it's just been a series of necessary hurdles to get a regulated environment onto this stuff. And that's another reason why we picked Corda, Dave, because Corda has 110 banks. Well, pick 110 banks and 110 operating jurisdictions in the world. You have a lot of regulation and compliance to deal with. So Corda firewall, Corda compliance, all of these things were professional enterprise grade tools for actually helping us comply, right? And I would challenge, I don't think they exist in the Bitcoin world, maybe not, maybe they do, you can tell me. They don't exist anywhere. IBM's got some flavorings of it because of the Hyperledger Fabric. But again, if your network is owned by 110 banks, you care about security, you care about privacy, you care about this industrial grade and industrial scale system.
Where do you think the province is at? Like, where do you think Calgary's at in terms of this adopting this technology?
So I modulate on this because I'm old school Albertan, born in Calgary, and I really, really like to rep for the community because I think we have so much latent potential. So let's talk about our differentiations on the positive side. Our differentiations are our regulation. For a 9-year period, we spent about, as a community, $70 million on energy regulations up in Edmonton. You know what we have as a result of that? The best energy regulations in the world for most operating conditions. We have really good measurement. We have really good production audit, Directive 17 and Directive 76. The rest of the world would love to adopt Directive 17. In fact, 110 regimes have been to Edmonton to look at how Directive 17 came together and how it's being used. Sad part of Directive 17, government's not putting any teeth to it because the industry is not in a point where we want to say, hey, you got to get your cash register, your measurement system put together. The other advantage we have is data. Because of this regulator and the amount of data that we've gathered as a people, so the people's data that has been lensed through the government and the regulators, the pool of data is deep. We know more about oil and gas transactions in a historical data perspective than any peoples on the planet. There are companies that have as much data as we have, big companies like Equinor and Chevron, but there is no operating regime that is as data rich as the Alberta people. This is a potential differentiation and advantage, particularly when you talk about how IoT, blockchain, and ML and AI work together, because that's the automated state that we're working on, and blockchain is the backbone. Thanks, Mike. And I think the ancillary is also true. We are not exploiting these benefits that we have. We are not differentiating ourselves. So I just got back from Houston, and you know what my message is in Houston? I gotta have my office there immediately. The blockchain adoption curve is minimum 10x more, maximum off by just scientific wild ass guessing, about 70 times more activity down there. And that's a capital issue. Do we have the capital to explore these models? We're convinced that we have the capital that we need to. Like, we don't have the profit, or the price differentials are in place. We can't develop our assets and get them into market like we used to, so we think we need new models, but we don't have the skin. We don't have the actual fuel to do it. So I think that much like ABC and us in the ecosystem are trying to pull our stuff together, there's a million brush fires running on digital innovation in Calgary. There's a lot of people interested in giving it rhetorical support. but there's no bonfire in the middle. And without that, I think what people fail to recognize is that, and I'm through the drapes, I have confirmation bias about blockchain. You start shit talking blockchain, I'll say you don't get it. You start saying it's really good, I'll say, hey, he gets it or she gets it. I have that, I'm there, right? So take that with a grain of salt, except that I came apart that from working in this industry for a long time. Houston is going to move faster, but they're going to leave stuff on the table that will be better at. What we need to do is get people working together, pulling on the oar together. We are incented to do this for many reasons. If we don't do it, that's at our peril. I feel, as much as I like to be rah-rah for the community, and you know if you've seen me speak before, I like to say, hey, we can do this. I'm afraid that if we don't do it soon, you're not appreciating the automated state that the industry and most industries are about to enter, where provenant data from remote sensors gives us calibrated, trustworthy data to systems that can streamline and execute contracts to value and run provenant models and analytics on top of that. You know how many jobs that would replace in Calgary in terms of admin, in terms of lawyers that go through disputes, in terms of accountants and auditors? There are more than enough jobs on the other side of this revolution, but we need to rethink really quickly, because if Houston develops these models, and they're working very aggressively, if you're going to move into a house, so I'm convinced again that we're going to move into this blockchain house as a people, a society, a government, and an industry. If you're going to move into a house, it's much better if you have some say of how the house is constructed and how the house is decorated. And if you're moving into a house, it's really, really good to have actual interface with the people who are building the house.
Yeah, so I guess follow up to that, my last question. We as a community, who should we be going after? What should we be trying to get them to do to further that adoption? Who do we need to call out?
I think we got to call out all the very well-meaning people who are in too many agencies to number. For instance, and I'm part of this, we realized we were part of it when YY fired up because ABC was in a lull. Then ABC came back and YY and ABC kind of looked across the divide and said, who the hell are you? Although it was all the same people, right? And women in blockchain, all of the same people. Like we're in a bit of a bubble. What I find is that fragmentation is true at every level of our innovation ecosystem. It's true in the government. Somebody told me the other day, and I haven't tested this on my own numbers, but if you look at municipal, provincial, and federal, for where you sit, there's about 210 agencies or committees or organizations that are involved in the prospect of digital transformation on an industrial perspective. 210, that means -5 because that's a bureaucracy, right? That means our money is going into setting up and admitting things, not actual innovation, right? So I think that's the first thing to call out. That same bonfire we got to build in the middle as innovative ecosystem, the government has to kind of, there's models out there that are better proven than the ones we're executing. Our thing is, and we used to joke about this a lot, Dave and I back years ago, the answer to the meetup problem was, oh my God, there's so many meetups. What we need is a meetup of meetups. Let's have another meetup. That's what happened for years, and it's still happening. And I think that happens at the government level, and it happens, unfortunately, industrial level. The amount of spend that we do independently of each other. My great hope is that blockchain, because it's the ultimate team sport, will actually lead us to the innovation teams, like the guys at Husky and the guys at CNRL, the teams that are forward, start looking at how they work together more aggressively. I think Calgarians and Albertans are good at promoting these models. We got to be a little bit better at executing them. And by that, we need to flip the script from calibration to iteration. We do 80% calibration, making sure we got a perfect thing, and then we do 20% iteration. Then we go back to our 80% calibration. We got to flip it to 80% iteration, then calibrate, and then do 80% iteration again. And if we can flip that script, we have everything else we need.
So we got to start getting shit done.
We got to do some shit. We got to build a fire in the middle.
Let's do it. That's it.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to ask us for another big round of applause. Thank you guys so much for having this conversation here at the ABC. These are the kind of things and the kind of talks we want to be able to have. make people aware of what's actually happening in the ecosystem. The one thing I'd love to point out is if you see all the banners, if you are in the blockchain space and you have a business in the blockchain space, we love to have your banner flag like waving at the ABC, so we can help raise awareness for what you're doing and show how collaboratively you're working within the ecosystem. One of the other things ABC has just done is we've just launched our latest site, and we're going to be able to have a directory. Like, we are 1,300 strong, but we want to grow that. We want to at least double that number in the next year so we can keep growing the ecosystem. So we're going to have a sign up so people can become members. We'll let you know about all the different events happening in the space, and if you are having an event, let us know so we can put it up on the website so that we can help promote and make aware of the things that you guys are doing in the community. So thank you guys so much again for attending. This is actually the largest turnout the ABC's ever had. So big round of applause to everyone who's actually coming out and